In the coastal city of Harbor Point, where rain polished the glass towers and the sea wind carried the smell of salt into every boardroom, Ethan Crown was a name people said with a kind of respect. On magazine covers he looked effortless. Sharp suit, calm smile, the founder who turned a garage project into Crown Arcadia, the software giant that powered everything from hospitals to hedge funds. At least, that was the legend. The truth began 8 years earlier in a smaller place, inside a rented. Mara Ellison wrote the first lines of code that made Arcadia possible. She didn't write them because she dreamed of fame. She wrote them because the problem bothered her the way a loose tooth bothers your tongue. She had been a doctoral student in computational security, building a new encryption framework that could adapt in real time, learning from the attacks thrown at it. Her advisor called it living math. Mara called it Lumen. Ethan, then, was a charming project manager with ambition bigger than his bank account. He could pitch a story like he could breathe, turning uncertainty into confidence for whoever listened. He met Mara at a university demo night, when her prototype repelled a simulated breach that was supposed to be unbeatable. He watched her fingers fly across the keyboard and looked at her the way investors would later look at him. "That's not just research," he said. "That's an empire." They married fast, the way people do when they're young and convinced love can outrun every consequence. For a while, it felt true. Mara handled the architecture and the algorithms. Ethan handled the presentations, the networking, the late-night coffee runs, the phone calls that made doors crack open. Together they formed something that worked, her precision and his momentum. Then Crown Arcadia got its first serious offer. A venture group based in Stonebridge wanted to invest, but only if Ethan was named sole CEO. "A single face," the partners explained. "A simple story." Ethan came home that night with a bottle of sparkling wine and a contract. Mara read every page, her eyes narrowing as if the paper itself were trying to lie. Her name appeared once, in a clause calling her a compensated consultant. Ethan promised it was temporary. He promised stock options, board seats, credit, all of it. "Just sign," he said. "We'll fix the paperwork after we close." Mara didn't want to sign. But the rent was late, the servers were overheating, and Ethan looked at her with that mix of panic and certainty that made her feel like the villain for hesitating. She signed. The next months blurred. Money arrived. So did pressure. Ethan's suits improved. His smile in photos became practiced. Mara's days became longer, her nights shorter, her inbox filled with requests for features that threatened to compromise the core of Lumen. When she pushed back, Ethan started saying, "We less and I more." When she asked about her equity, he said the board was still finalizing. When she asked about public credit, he said, "It's complicated." The first time Mara truly understood what was happening, she was watching a keynote live stream from their apartment. Ethan stood on a stage beneath a massive screen that displayed Lumen in bold letters. He spoke about sleepless nights, about brilliance, about a moment of inspiration that changed his life. The crowd applauded. Mara waited for him to say her name. He never did. She confronted him afterward, and the fight that followed didn't sound like the kind couples have when they're tired. It sounded like a business negotiation that had been misfiled as a marriage. Ethan claimed the company needed stability, investors needed confidence, the market needed a hero. Mara said heroes don't steal. Ethan said she was being emotional. Mara said he was being greedy. By dawn, they were standing on opposite sides of the kitchen island like strangers. Their divorce finalized quietly. Ethan's lawyers insisted on a confidentiality agreement. Mara, exhausted, signed again, taking a settlement that looked large until you compared it to the value of what she had built. She left Harbor Point with a single suitcase and a laptop full of code she could no longer legally touch. Years passed. Crown Arcadia became a titan. Ethan became a billionaire in interviews that never mentioned Mara Ellison. He married Serena Vale, a stylish socialite from the inland city of Redcrest, known for charity galas and a smile that never reached her eyes. Together they planned the biggest event Harbor Point had seen, the Arcadia Jubilee, a celebration of 10 years of innovation, to be held in the Skyglass Atrium downtown. 2 weeks before the gala, Mara returned to Harbor Point. She arrived under a different last name now, Mara Lane, borrowed from her late mother, a name that made her feel less like a footnote. She had a new job at a modest cybersecurity firm in the Riverside district, and a new purpose that wasn't about revenge so much as restoration. On her phone, a message waited from an old colleague who still worked at Arcadia. "I found something. If you're back in town, we need to talk." On the night of the Jubilee, Ethan stood at the entrance of the Skyglass Atrium, greeting donors, politicians, and press. Serena floated at his side, glittering in silver. Cameras flashed. A string quartet played. Ethan believed he had sealed the past inside contracts and court orders. Then, across the marble floor, a woman stepped out of the crowd in a simple black dress, her hair pinned back, her eyes steady as a metronome. For a second, Ethan's practiced smile faltered. He stared as if he'd seen a ghost in the code. Mara Lane walked toward him without rushing, as though the entire glittering room was finally moving at the speed she preferred, exact, inevitable, and impossible to interrupt. The Skyglass Atrium was built for spectacle. Its ceiling arched like a frozen wave, and the windows were so tall the city lights looked like constellations trapped behind glass. Waiters drifted between tables carrying crystal flutes and miniature plates, while screens displayed looping footage of Arcadia's greatest moments, product launches, ribbon cuttings, Ethan Crown shaking hands with governors and generals. Every clip ended with the same line in gold letters, "A decade of genius." Ethan loved nights like this. In public, he could be anything the room needed: visionary, philanthropist, family man. He used that skill the way other people used oxygen. Serena, on his arm, played her part as if she had been rehearsing it since childhood. She laughed at the right jokes, touched the right shoulders, and glanced at the cameras with an expression that said she belonged in every frame. When Mara approached, the air around Ethan tightened. For a breath he looked young again, like the man who once carried servers up 3 flights of stairs and promised to share a future he hadn't earned. Serena noticed the shift immediately. "Who is that?" she asked, still smiling for the nearest photographer. "A guest," Ethan said too quickly. Mara stopped at a respectful distance, close enough for him to see the faint scar above her eyebrow from the night their prototype overheated and the casing snapped. Her eyes moved over him, the tailored tux, the watch worth a year of her old salary, the confident posture built on other people's labor. She didn't glare. She didn't plead. She simply looked as if she had arrived to collect something that had been misplaced. "Ethan," she said. Serena's smile stiffened. "Do you know my husband?" Mara turned to her politely. "We met a long time ago." Ethan's throat worked. "Mara, what are you doing here?" "I was invited," she said, and from her clutch she produced a printed card. The name on it read, "Mara Lane, guest of the board." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the stage where the board chair, Oliver Klein, was speaking into a microphone. Klein was an older man with a calm voice and a reputation for loving numbers more than people. Ethan had always kept him satisfied with quarterly miracles and polished forecasts. Mara watched Ethan glance at him and understood at once. Whatever her old colleague had found, it had reached the board. "Enjoy the evening," she told Ethan, then stepped away into the crowd as if she belonged there. People glanced at her, curious, but no one recognized her. Ethan had been careful about that. The program moved forward. A jazz band replaced the quartet. A charity auction began. Serena bid aggressively on a painting because cameras were watching. Ethan forced himself to smile, but his attention kept snagging on Mara's quiet presence near the side of the room. She spoke to no one for long. She observed, like a scientist studying a system about to fail. Near the bar, a junior engineer named Jonah Reese hovered close to Mara, pretending to study the drink menu. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper. "They can't ignore it now." Mara didn't look at him, but her fingers closed around a slim flash drive in her clutch. Jonah had risked his job to copy repositories, email threads, and a forgotten patent draft with her signature. "If he tries to spin it," Jonah said, "Klein will open the audit file." Mara nodded once, as stone. At 9 sharp, the lights dimmed and the main screen brightened. Klein returned to the stage. "Tonight," he announced, "we celebrate innovation. But innovation is not a myth. It has authors. It has fingerprints." Ethan felt Serena's hand tighten on his sleeve. "What is he doing?" she whispered. Klein continued. "Arcadia's adaptive encryption engine, Lumen, changed the industry. It has saved lives. It has protected fortunes. It has made this company what it is. And it is time we honor the person who created it." Ethan's heart hammered as if he'd climbed those old apartment stairs again. He leaned toward Klein's assistant, but the assistant's eyes avoided him. Ethan looked across the room and found Mara. She was standing straight, chin lifted, as if she had known the exact moment this would happen. Klein gestured toward a side entrance. "Please welcome Dr. Mara Ellison." The name hit the room like dropped glass. A murmur rippled through the guests. Ethan went still. Serena's smile vanished entirely, replaced by raw confusion. Mara walked forward. Not Mara Lane now, but Mara Ellison, her original name restored without asking permission. She stepped into the spotlight, and the screen behind her changed to a timeline of Arcadia's early days. Photos appeared, a cramped workspace, whiteboards covered in equations, a younger Ethan standing beside a woman whose face had been cropped out in every public version. Tonight, the crop was gone. Mara's face filled the frame. Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck. He tried to move, to speak, to interrupt, but the room's attention had shifted away from him as if he'd become background noise. Klein handed Mara a microphone. "Dr. Ellison," he said, "our internal review uncovered documentation indicating you were the principal inventor of Lumen and the original architect of its adaptive core. We apologize for the omission. And we have questions." Mara's voice, when she spoke, was steady. "I'm not here for applause," she said. "I'm here because the truth is overdue, and because lies don't scale forever." Ethan's knees felt weak. He searched Serena's face for support and found only suspicion. Behind the stage, security quietly closed 2 doors. Cameras, hungry, angled in closer. Mara looked directly at Ethan. "You built your empire on my work," she said. "Tonight, you're going to explain how you did it." For the first time in years, Ethan Crown realized the past had not been buried. It had been waiting, patient, precise, until the right moment to stand up in front of everyone. After Mara's accusation, the atrium went silent, even the band stopped. Klein didn't invite Ethan to the stage. He didn't have to. "Mr. Crown," he said evenly, "please join us." The request sounded polite, but it carried the weight of a summons. Ethan's legs moved on instinct, his mind racing through options. Deny, deflect, flatter, threaten. He had won rooms like this before. He had turned scandals into opportunities with a few well-placed anecdotes. But the screen behind Mara still displayed the early photos, and the faces in those photos looked like evidence, not nostalgia. He stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from an assistant with fingers that trembled. Mara didn't move. She let him stand beside her like a defendant who had wandered into court late. Ethan smiled, a reflex. "This is unexpected," he began. "Dr. Ellison and I worked together in the early days. The company appreciates all contributions." Mara lifted her hand. "Stop," she said, not loud, just firm, and the single word cut his speech clean in half. "Don't turn this into a gratitude speech." A murmur rose again. Serena, still near the front, stared at Ethan as if he'd become someone else. People she thought were friends leaned away from her, hungry for distance. Klein nodded toward a laptop on the podium. "Our audit team located archived files from the original servers," he said. "In addition, we received communications from employees and former employees. Dr. Ellison has also provided documentation. We want clarity on 3 issues: authorship, ownership, and whether the company's public filings were accurate." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Arcadia's filings were accurate," he said. Klein clicked a remote. The screen changed. A document appeared, an early patent application titled Adaptive Encryption Framework with Reinforcement Feedback. The inventor line read Mara Ellison. Ethan's name appeared nowhere. Another click revealed an email thread from 8 years earlier, Ethan writing to investors. Mara will remain off paper for now. Optics. Another click showed a contract addendum with Mara's signature and an internal note from Ethan. She doesn't understand cap tables. Get it done. You told me, Serena blurted from the crowd, that you built this alone. Heads turned. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, warning. Serena stepped forward anyway, her voice sharp with betrayal. You said she was a minor consultant. You said she signed away everything because she was unstable. A hush followed, thick and awkward. Mara's gaze finally shifted to Serena. Unstable, she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. That's what you were told. Serena swallowed. He said you tried to sabotage him. That you were jealous. Mara took the microphone again. I wasn't jealous, she said. I was erased. Klein's voice cut in, businesslike. Mr. Crown, is this patent authentic? Ethan forced a laugh that sounded wrong. Patents change hands, he said. We acquired rights. From whom? Klein asked. Ethan hesitated a fraction too long. Mara looked at him and, for the first time, the audience saw emotion in her, something like exhaustion. From me, she said before Ethan could answer. With a contract that misrepresented what I was signing. Klein frowned. Dr. Ellison, you previously signed a confidentiality agreement. I did, Mara acknowledged. Under pressure, with threats of litigation I couldn't afford. That doesn't make the facts untrue. And it doesn't absolve fraud. The word fraud landed like a gavel. Ethan's instinct was to attack the messenger. This is a personal vendetta, he snapped. She's here to humiliate me. Mara's eyes narrowed slightly. If I wanted humiliation, she said, I would have done it with rumors. I came with receipts. She nodded to the side. Jonah Reese, pale but determined, wheeled a small rolling cart forward. On it sat a projector and a sealed folder. Klein opened the folder and removed a thick stack of papers stamped Internal Review. Our counsel has advised us to pause tonight's program, Klein announced to the crowd, and to restrict public statements until we complete a formal investigation. However, because our stakeholders are present, we will disclose one finding. The original source code repository for Lumen lists Dr. Ellison as the sole author for the first 18 months. Klein turned to Ethan, his voice colder now. Mr. Crown, did you direct anyone to remove Dr. Ellison's name from company materials? Ethan tried to speak and found no words that sounded safe. He looked for an exit, but security near the doors had shifted, not blocking him outright, just making it clear that fleeing would be noticed. The crowd couldn't hear the details, but they could hear the tone. Marriage turning into public fracture. Serena faced Klein. If you're investigating, she said, louder, I'll cooperate. I'm not going down for his sins. Ethan's world tipped. He had always believed loyalty could be purchased and fear could be managed. Tonight, both currencies had collapsed. Mara watched him, not with triumph but with something closer to closure. She leaned into the microphone for the final time. I didn't come back to take what's yours, she said. I came back to take back what was mine. Klein nodded once, then addressed the room. This event is concluded, he announced. Please exit calmly. Media will receive a statement in the morning. As guests began to move, whispers turned into a roar. Ethan stood on the stage under the giant screen that still read a decade of genius, and for the first time, the slogan sounded like an accusation. Outside, Harbor Point's rain began again, soft as static tonight. Morning in Harbor Point brought headlines instead of hangovers. By sunrise, every news site carried the same photo. Mara in the spotlight, Ethan beside her, his face tense. Commentators replayed the clip of Klein announcing the audit, pausing on the screen where Mara's name sat alone on the inventor line. Stock trackers flashed red. Crown Arcadia's share price fell hard before the opening bell. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse office staring at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows, watching helicopters circle downtown like insects. Ethan's legal team arrived before 8. They urged him to make a statement, deny wrongdoing, praise the board, promise cooperation, frame Mara as a disgruntled former partner. Ethan nodded at all the right moments, but his mind kept returning to the way Mara's voice had sounded, steady, tired, inevitable. At 10, the board called an emergency meeting at Arcadia headquarters. a sleek building of steel and water features that had once been a warehouse where Mara debugged code on borrowed monitors. Ethan entered the boardroom expecting to regain control. Instead, he found his keycard deactivated. A security officer escorted him in as if he were a visitor. Klein sat at the head of the table with counsel on either side. Jonah Reese was there too, eyes red from a night of statements. Serena sat near the door, sunglasses on indoors, jaw clenched. She did not look at Ethan. Klein spoke first. Effective immediately, the board is placing you on administrative leave pending investigation. Ethan's laugh sounded brittle. You can't do that. I am the company. The company is not a person, Klein replied. It is contracts, assets, and obligations. Right now, it is also risk. Counsel slid a document across the table. Suspension terms, access restrictions, a demand for devices. Ethan's fingers hovered over the paper as if it were electrified. This is because of her, he said, voice low. She wants revenge. Klein's expression didn't change. Dr. Ellison has filed a claim in federal court alleging misappropriation of intellectual property, fraudulent inducement, and reputational harm. We have also received inquiries from regulators regarding prior disclosures. Ethan's breath hitched. Regulators. That word meant subpoenas, audits, prison possibilities. He looked at Serena finally. Tell them you don't believe this. Serena removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen, but the anger in them was sharp. I believed you, she said. That's the problem. Ethan leaned toward her. We're married. Serena's lips curved without warmth. Then you should have treated me like a partner, not a prop. She pushed a sealed envelope toward counsel. These are copies, she said. Messages, payment confirmations, the account numbers I mentioned. I'm cooperating. Ethan stared as if she had slapped him. You're betraying me. You betrayed everyone, Serena said. I'm just refusing to drown with you. By noon, Arcadia announced an interim CEO and a full independent review. Klein's statement was brief and careful. Mara's statement, released through her attorney, was even shorter. Truth is not negotiable. The following weeks unfolded like a slow collapse. Reporters camped outside Arcadia's headquarters. Former employees came forward with stories of credit stolen, bonuses withheld, pressure to delete names from repositories. A tech blogger published the original demo video from University Night, the one Ethan had thought disappeared. In it, Mara stood beside the prototype explaining Lumen's adaptive loop while Ethan watched from the crowd. Ethan's lawyers filed motions. They tried to enforce the old confidentiality agreement. Mara's team argued coercion and fraud. The judge scheduled an expedited hearing because the alleged IP sat at the center of critical infrastructure contracts. The case wasn't just personal anymore. On the day of the first hearing, snow dusted Harbor Point streets, turning the city cold. The courthouse in Midtown was crowded with press and curious onlookers. Ethan arrived surrounded by attorneys and a publicist who kept whispering reminders, shoulders back, eyes calm, no sudden gestures. Mara arrived with only two people, her lawyer and Jonah Reese, who had resigned from Arcadia and now carried a folder like a shield. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than the Skyglass atrium, but the stakes felt larger. Under oath, Mara described the early days, the contract pressure, the keynote where Ethan took her work and turned it into his story. She spoke plainly, without flourish. When Ethan's attorney tried to paint her as bitter, Mara answered with dates, file names, commit histories. The judge listened as if hearing a technical lecture, because that is what truth looked like in this case, version control. Then counsel for Arcadia presented its own findings. The internal review, thorough, had traced document edits, repository changes, and metadata deletions. The pattern pointed to directives from Ethan's executive assistant, who testified that Ethan had ordered cleanup whenever Mara's name surfaced. The judge didn't rule on guilt that day, but he did issue an injunction. Arcadia could not claim sole ownership of Lumen's core until trial. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Mara did not stop for questions. She stepped into a car, expression unreadable, and disappeared into the winter traffic. That night, Ethan returned to his penthouse to find the locks changed. Arcadia had reclaimed company property, including the building's security contract. A single box sat in the hallway, a few personal items, a framed magazine cover, and an old photo from the garage days that someone had finally stopped cropping. Ethan picked up the photo and stared at it until his hands shook. In the reflection of the glass, he saw his own face, older, lonelier, and suddenly stripped of its legend. Across town, Mara sat at a small kitchen table in a rented apartment overlooking the river district. She opened her laptop and, for the first time in years, typed the words she had been forbidden to touch into a new file: Lumen, Reborn. Not to burn Arcadia down, but to prove she could build without him, and that what was taken could be made whole again. Spring came late to Harbor Point, but when it arrived it did so with insistence. The rain warmed. The river ran faster. Cherry trees along the waterfront scattered petals across sidewalks like quiet confetti. In the months after the injunction, Arcadia lived in a limbo that no marketing campaign could disguise. Clients demanded reassurances. Governments demanded compliance reports. Engineers, once proud, worked with a tense concentration of people trying not to make a mistake that would become a headline. Mara kept her life small on purpose. She avoided interviews, declined podcast invitations, and let her attorney handle the noise. Most days she walked to a co-working space in the Riverside district, plugged in her laptop, and wrote. The work wasn't about recreating the past, it was about cleaning it. She rebuilt the adaptive engine from principles, documenting every decision, naming every contributor, designing the system so no single person could ever quietly erase another again. Jonah Reese worked beside her, still amazed by the calm way she solved problems. "It's like you're not even angry," he said one afternoon as they tested a new module. "I was angry," Mara replied. "But anger isn't a product. It doesn't ship." The trial date approached like thunder you could see from miles away. Ethan fought it publicly while losing ground privately. He sold assets to fund his defense: a villa in Redcrest, a vintage car collection, a painting Serena had once bid on for cameras. His publicist tried to rebrand him as a visionary caught in a complicated domestic dispute. It didn't stick. The documents were too clean. The commit histories didn't care about charisma. Serena filed for divorce. She didn't ask for sympathy, and she didn't get much. Society pages that once praised her taste now treated her as a footnote to a scandal. She moved into a quiet apartment across the bridge in Northgate, took meetings with counsel, and built her own strategy: cooperate fully, detach completely, survive. In early May, Arcadia's board requested mediation. The company's lawyers had reached a brutal conclusion. Even if they could delay judgment, they could not unwind the evidence, and they could not afford to gamble with infrastructure contracts that depended on public trust. Klein invited Mara to a conference room on the 42nd floor of Arcadia headquarters. The view was spectacular. The atmosphere was not. Ethan arrived late, thinner than before, his confidence frayed at the edges. When he saw Mara, he looked as if he wanted to speak her name again, to summon an old version of reality. Mara didn't give him that power. She nodded once and sat. The mediator outlined terms. Arcadia would acknowledge Mara as Lumen's principal inventor in all public records. The company would pay damages for misappropriation and reputational harm. Mara would receive equity, real equity, not promises, and a permanent seat on an ethics and attribution committee with veto authority over IP credit. Arcadia would fund an independent scholarship program in Mara's name for underrepresented engineers. In exchange, Mara would license the updated version of Lumen back to Arcadia for critical contracts, with royalties and oversight. Ethan listened, jaw tight. When it came time for his response, he tried one last move. "You're taking everything," he said to Mara. "You'll ruin me." Mara met his eyes. "I'm not taking everything," she said. "I'm taking my name back." The mediator asked Ethan if he accepted. He looked toward Klein, toward the council, toward the window where Harbor Point gleamed like a city that had no patience for personal tragedy. Finally, he nodded. The sound was almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of an empire conceding its origin. The settlement was announced a week later. Arcadia's statement was carefully written. Market stabilized. At the next Arcadia Town Hall, Klein read a formal correction and apologized to employees for a culture that rewarded silence. Mara appeared by video only once. She told the staff, "Credit is a security feature." Then she signed off, refusing to be anyone's mascot again. "In this industry, always," Some outlets called Mara a hero. Others called her a cautionary tale about power and contracts. Mara didn't care much for either. She cared that the record now showed what had happened, and that it would be harder for the next genius to be hidden behind someone else's smile. Ethan's consequences didn't end with the settlement. Regulators pursued him for disclosure violations tied to earlier fundraising rounds. Prosecutors declined to make a spectacle, but a quiet plea deal followed: a fine, a ban from serving as an officer of a public company, and a requirement to cooperate with ongoing compliance reforms. The billionaire image faded quickly when it no longer had a platform. One evening in June, Mara walked alone along the waterfront, stopping near the same university hall where she had first demonstrated her prototype years before. Through the windows she could see students setting up tables for another demo night. Their laughter rose into the warm air, full of the kind of confidence she remembered from before she learned how stories could be stolen. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jonah. The first scholarship applications just came in. Hundreds of them. Mara smiled, small and real. She typed back, "Good. Let's read every one." Across the city, Ethan watched the lights from a rented apartment, a place that felt temporary because his identity still was. He opened a laptop and searched for his own name. The top result was no longer a glowing profile. It was a case summary and a corrected patent record with Mara Ellison's name at the top. He sat with that for a long time, because there was nothing left to spin. Mara, meanwhile, returned to her desk and opened a new document titled Sunrise Protocol. It wasn't for Arcadia. It wasn't for revenge. It was for the future she would author openly, line by line, with every fingerprint where it belonged. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this take time, detail, and heart to create. If you enjoyed this powerful journey of truth, betrayal, and justice, and you want more emotional, high-impact stories like it, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps keep these stories coming, and you won't miss the next unforgettable chapter.